They may be called the next generation, but they're the church of today. Reach, disciple, and mobilize students to share the hope of the gospel. This is Next Gen on Mission with Shane Pruitt and Paul Wooster.
Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the Next Gen on Mission podcast. I am Shane Pruitt, National Next Gen Director for the North American Mission Board. Always with me is my co-host, my brother, Paul Wooster, who is our National Collegiate Director with the North American Mission Board. What's up, Paul? How you doing today, man?
What's going on, man? Hey, I noticed something on your Instagram. You had your 2-year anniversary of what? What was that, Shane? That was a pretty
of running, man. Of running. Yes. I started running during shelter in place, and mainly for like mental health reasons. Just to get out. When you and I, we travel so much. And so that first probably 3 to 4 weeks at home I was like, that's just awesome. And then I felt like a caged animal, you know what I mean? And so I started running, and I think my first run, I got about 10 yards in and was ready to pass out. But it's been a fun journey since then, man, to keep running. And man. And then you here recently, man, cause you are like a skateboarder, like you're a surfer, but you picked the skateboard back up and you're doing like some sick tricks, man. I didn't know you were like Paul Tony Hawk Wooster, man.
Yeah, man. It's that I'm 38. So my wife is like, hey, it's about that time. Hopefully this is as bad as the midlife crisis gets. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Was she checking the insurance policy before she gave you permission to go do that?
And I wear all the pads. So my son is 10 years old. So we'll go to the skate park together and we'll both be like completely padded up, wrist guards, helmet, knee pads. And so,
I see you, man. You look like Iron Man out there, but dude, you are doing some crazy tricks, man. It's awesome. Yeah.
If my wife had her way, I would have one of those big plastic bubbles out there.
That's right. That's right. Well, hey, God bless you, man. I can't even stand on a skateboard without just like totally breaking my back for sure. Hey, well, Paul, I'm so excited about our guest today. It's a good friend of mine and just really a good friend of NAM and our GenSend team, and that is Chris Trent. Chris is a longtime student pastor at Johnson Ferry in Georgia, which is a great, great church. But now he serves as the Next Gen Catalyst for the Georgia Baptist Convention. He's also a father, a husband, an author, but most importantly than anything, just a follower of Jesus. And one thing I love about Chris is he has a heart for the gospel, and he has a heart for next gen leaders to influence those who are influencing a generation with the gospel. So Chris Trent, welcome to the Next Gen on Mission podcast, my man.
Man, this is awesome. Although I feel completely intimidated after hearing the running conversation and the skateboarding conversation. I feel like I'm out of place here because I do neither one of those things, but I love you guys and it's a blessing to be a part of this thing.
Hey, I see the dartboard in the background. So, darts.
Well, this is my son's room that I took over when he went off to college, made it my office, but
I was going to point, you pointed out the dartboard. I was going to point out the guitar. Can you play
more of an artist than anything? Yeah. More of a music guy. So,
anyway. Nice. Man. Yeah. Well, hey, that's cool. You got a guitar. Paul used to have a surfboard in his background. And the running joke was that surfboard had seen more Zoom calls than waves.
That's good. Well, it's been a hot minute since this one's seen anything. It started out years ago playing Lord, I Left Your Name on High with my youth group, back in the day. I'm trying to brag.
I almost got that.
Camp Great. Yes. Camp Great. Awesome. Well, hey, Chris, before we get too spiritual, man, tell us one fun fact about Chris Trent that we may not already know that we need to know.
I don't think it's too much of a secret, but I do magic as a hobby. That's kind of weird.
I did not know that.
You did? Yeah. Awesome. So I'm totally into it, man. For my buddies with guys like Jared Hall, some of those guys that travel and do it, but I'll be what's called an amateur magician. I used to get one event a year where I'd get paid a little bit to do it at this local school. But yeah, man, it's something I'm just totally into. A member of a local magic club, which is totally nerdy. You can only imagine what that's like. It's probably exactly what you think, a bunch of people standing around doing tricks on each other.
That's cool.
But I tell you, it's been a great tool to have in my back pocket on mission trips, but also just with teenagers, especially as I got older. I didn't have as much in common obviously, as a 40-something-year-old, especially back in the day. And so to have a little card trick or something, that was always fun. So it's good little hobby, I guess.
Yeah, I love that stuff. When like there's an event, and say if I'm speaking at it and there's an illusionist, which I think is like the Christian version for saying magician,
That's it. Well, yeah, depending on where you're at, you're either
an illusionist. Yeah, an illusionist. Yeah. It's like the sanctified way of saying magician. But I love that stuff, man. Like, I'm like, I geek out over it. I think it's cool. Next time we're together,
I'll teach you something you can do on your kids too, man. That's always
Heck
fun.
Yeah, dude. Heck yeah, let's do it.
Oh, that's incredible, man. I love it. So can you show us one right now on the
no, that's not going to happen. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let's jump into the serious questions. What do we need to know about Generation Z?
Man, that's great. That's a great place to start, I think, for sure. Here's where I would start. I would say believe the stats that we're hearing, like recently Washington Post talking about how nearly half of the Gen Z group said that schooling's incredibly hard for them whenever they were surveyed. The Washington Post article talked about, and then you look at articles coming out like the Wall Street Journal that talk about how just struggles with anxiety is out there. And, we hear those things. And I think as adults, a lot of times we're like, really, the kids really have it a lot harder. I mean, honestly, it's always been tough, but I think there's something unique about this generation when it comes to what they're going through, especially when you add two major moments in history, one being, internet and technology that's tied to that through smartphones and devices. And then even within that phenomenon, you have things like social media and the impact of that. And I think we all know that. I don't think that's like, whoa, what? I never thought about that. But you add that into a pandemic, which we've never experienced before.
Right.
I think you'd have to go way back to kids that are going through moments of like, my dad is off at war to have those type of impact, so you add those things together, and then you hear articles come out like in the Wall Street Journal talk about how this generation is dealing with anxiety more than any other generation. Right. So I say, believe the stats, but here's the key for me. I think what that does is that creates also an incredibly unique opportunity for us as Christ followers to give them something that they desperately need. And that's hope in Jesus. Right. It seems like, and I know, Shane, you and I've had these conversations, and as you've been just so blessed in the last year of your travels, it just feels like every event, whether it be small or big, kids are responding to the gospel in ways that we've just not seen in a while. It feels right. And so I would say when it comes to thinking about this next year, but believe that they're different, believe that there's real struggles, authentic struggles there, but also recognize their genuine need for Christ. And I think an openness to it that exists as well.
Yeah, I agree. I would agree. Even some of these things can also be advantageous to gospel conversations and breaking through some of what used to be and still is a thing, the cool factor, and it seems like you're able to, at least I've noticed, I've been able to really engage younger people with the gospel directly, even if they're anxious or whatever. It's still like we can have that relevant, real conversation. And so the gospel is still relevant, and we're still able to engage them on that level. So let's talk about your story, Chris. We love, Shane and I love just how fired up you are about knowing Christ, making him known, reaching the next generation. You've given your life to this. So can you just share a little bit of your story and how God's built that passion in your life?
Yeah. It starts for me in a moment. My dad, we owned a service station, way back in the day, like the classic service station where you, pump gas. And, my dad loads me up in our El Camino, not kidding, and drives me down to Twin Hill Park. I didn't mean to make a joke as I'm about to say something real serious, but, it lets me know my mom and dad are getting a divorce, right? So that's in like middle school that takes place for me. And we were unchurched. I didn't know Christ. I grew up in the South. So definitely, had heard of Jesus and been to maybe a VBS or two, but definitely didn't have a relationship with Jesus and didn't have any consistent influence. And like so many other people, whenever something hard comes into your life, you start trying to fill that void with everything else. So what I like to say is I'm completely a product of youth ministry, because it was at the end of my junior year that a youth pastor in my town reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you like to go to youth camp?" And I said yes to that. I went up to Ridgecrest, North Carolina, to Centrifuge. And it was that week that I understood what it meant to follow Jesus. And so, and it was literally weeks after that I started looking at my youth pastor, first kind of being blown away that you could get paid to do that. But then, you know what I'm saying? But then second, just looking at him and going, I want to do what you do. Like that looks like a fun, worthwhile life to live there, you know? So for me, that's how it started, man. And he was such a great mentor and discipler in that way. It helped me, you know, where to go to college. And then I was blessed, you know, outside of that, with just other folks that helped me sort of figure out what it meant to follow Jesus. But more importantly for me, well, not more importantly, but for me, just what it meant to follow Jesus as a person serving in ministry, you know, and helping me figure out those steps.
Yeah, that's awesome. Chris, continuing on like with your story, I love that. Tell us about your time as a student pastor, because what I love, what we're talking about, you know, even in this time is going to be, you know, like ministry for the long haul. And you've been doing Next Gen Ministries for a long time. And we all know those statistics out there of, you know, the 2 to 3 years bouncing from church to church, rough. Ministry to ministry. So tell us about your time as a student pastor, and then now what you're doing now at Georgia Baptist to really mobilize Next Gen leaders for the long haul.
Yeah. So, you know, that really started, Shane, for me, like I had a mentor in college. I was an intern at Redemption Church in Mobile, Alabama, right before Ed Linton got there, actually, but served there for 3 years. And I had this one mentor, Mike Cook, and he would say to me things about longevity. And I had no idea the seeds that he was planting in my life. But, you know, he talked about, he would say things like to me, "Hey, you know, a lot of people say that the first 2 years is your honeymoon in working at a church, but I'm here to tell you that it's after 2 years that it starts to get good. And at 5 years, it gets sweet." Right. So it was interesting because I left college, and what I ended up having a goal, Wendy and I, we went out to Southwestern Seminary, and we intentionally did not apply for any churches when we got out there. And the reason for that was I had no intention of staying in Texas, Shane. You know, I know you live right. You live right there close to where I live. And
come on, man. Texas is the greatest nation in the world. Man.
Now I say I'm glad I lived there, but at the time I wasn't on board. Right. Yeah. I had not discovered the greatness of Tex-Mex. But now I understand it. Okay. But so we went out there, and we intentionally did not interview because we did not want to take a church for like 2 years and then leave and come back, you know, to the South or whatever. But sure enough, a church over in Garland, which is northeast of the whole Metroplex there, reached out to me, and we went into that church with a goal of seeing at least one group of students graduate from seventh grade all the way through. And what God ended up allowing us to do was seeing 3 of those go all the way through, because we were there for like almost right around 8 years. And before that led to Johnson Ferry, where I came on board here in Marietta, Georgia, right outside of kind of north of Atlanta. And that opportunity was to be the middle school pastor. And I always had that leaning towards middle school ministry. And man, before you knew it, it was, you know, we ended up being there a lot of years, you know, like 16 years when it was all said and done. And started off as the middle school pastor for majority of the time, was the middle school pastor, and the last few years functioned as the student pastor there as well. And thought I was going to be there for a long time, but God opened this door with Georgia Baptist. And so for me, what it allows me to do is to help youth pastors and churches experience longevity with their staff. And because, man, I think the question was, why is longevity important? Well, what I can tell you is the relationships that are built with students. And more importantly, I would say even with your volunteers and your workers. Right. If you have leadership that is stable for a long time, it's going to make a huge difference with the impact that you can make. And I'm telling you, man, like, so it's been like 14 months ago now. When we left, this is going to sound terrible as a youth pastor, we kind of missed the kids a little bit, you know? But who I missed were all my leaders.
Of course.
That's who I missed, you know, because that's where all of those seeds were planted and all that work was done, and they were partners with us in our work there, So, man, that's kind of my heartbeat for sure. And want to see that number change from that 2 year and out thing, man. I want to see that continue to change to where, because it's even great for their families. I mean, there's so many layers to this thing.
Of course.
So.
Yeah. And Chris, I mean, I know myself, Paul, we've been around so many events. We've been around so many different churches, so many different ministries, is that I can tell there is a vast difference between teenagers and college students that have had long tenured leaders versus students who have had one leader after another. Like there's just a difference and one of the biggest difference is a trust for leadership. Like if they've had long tenured leadership, they'll trust you as a leader. If they've had one leader after another, they don't, because they're like, well, hey, what do you care? You'll be gone in a year or two anyway. You know what I mean? Like there's just a difference there. Yeah.
Big time. Well, yeah. And so there was another study that came out of the Springtide Institute. It was a religious study, great study. But one of the things, one of the phrases they coined was relational authority. And the idea of relational authority is this idea that the only reason I'm going to give you the current generation of teenagers, right? The only reason I'm going to give you authority in my life to speak into my life is if there is a relationship there. Right. And that's changed. Like in the past, teenagers would respect adults and allow adults to speak into their life just because they were authoritative adults or whatever.
I'm the dad. I said so. I'm the dad.
Right. Yeah. But now there's a different mindset.
That's
so, man, if that's true, longevity is going to matter because you're going to have to build up. You're going to have to build up, stability with these students, and it's going to make a huge difference. But I'm with you, man. I can see the difference myself, and even traveling around Georgia, the student ministries that are incredibly healthy tend to be the ones that have longevity on their staff, and not just youth pastors, but pastors and worship pastors across the board. It's just good all the way around.
No doubt. And so, Chris, with that in mind, I mean, we know that the Lord moves people around. We know the Lord moves his shepherds. We know that. So some guys are going to go plant a church or go be a lead pastor, or maybe God calls them to another next gen ministry in a local context, or God moves ladies around and leaders. And so we know it happens. But for those who are saying, you know what, I want to plant my life here, unless the Lord moves me, I want to plant my life here. I want to be in this ministry. I want to be in this context for the long haul. What are just a couple of practical ministry hacks you would share? What are some just practical things that they need to do for longevity?
Yeah. So, I think there's a whole lot of things that we could talk about right now that are on my heart with that. Things like, getting along with your pastor, supporting your pastor. There are things like that I think can make a huge, huge difference. But, when I looked at the questions ahead of time, just to kind of prepare, I hope that's not a secret that y'all send out the questions or whatever. But,
this is completely spirit led in the moment. It's like the Lord, what shall we ask next?
Yes. Indeed, yeah. Well, I'll tell you the thing that came to my mind. If I could, I started thinking along, I'm only going to be able to talk about one or two, right? So the thing I wrote down first is, man, the secret and the sauce is volunteers. If there's a hack to be had, it's understanding that as a youth pastor, this model of I'm going to roll into whatever church and do this big Wednesday night program that's completely surrounded by, my personality and my ability to do fun games and all of that. We just know based on experience, years of experience, that it just doesn't work. Not long-term. Now, I say it doesn't work. Obviously, you got the right personality and you get the right games and the right giveaways. You might can draw a crowd, but is it a crowd that's genuinely being discipled and growing in the Lord? That's where it starts to get a little tricky. But I think when it comes to longevity, when you do that and you go in as sort of that Pied Piper type of mindset, I'm going to be that guy that does or whatever. The problem is you're only going to be able to sustain that energy for so long.
Right.
And that typically is about 2 to 3 years. Where that's what we're seeing, right? We see that's where the change. So after a couple of years, you've already gone through your bag of tricks and you just cannot maintain that. And then also in addition to that, parents start, they put up with that the first couple of years because they're so excited about it, about the draw, but they realize maybe you're not that organized because you're just focused or whatever. That starts to pile up on you as well. And so that's where it's just crucial that you build relationships with adults.
Right.
And that you surround your ministry with people who care, that you train them well, that you trust them. Some of my best friends have been like, when it comes to youth workers that have volunteered for me, and the people that have the biggest impact are the ones that are youth workers. And I'm going to tell you, man, we ought to strive to be youth pastors that when something bad goes down in a kid's life, we're not the first person they call.
Wow.
But rather their volunteers are the first person they call.
I love that.
That Sunday morning life group leader, whoever that is. Yep. I mean, and you get a phone call from the life group leader, but that shouldn't bother us. That we should celebrate that. Like right.
Yes.
Because again, it goes back to that springtide study, relational authority.
I love that.
We have to build relationships. That means unless you're just like significantly more awesome than Jesus, you're going to have you're still trying to figure out whether or not you are.
Yeah.
Am I or am I not?
Even hearing that statement just makes you cringe,
Well, I think about that. Here's the thing. He had a close relationship with 12, And so in youth ministry, let's say you have 25 or 30. Well, you're really only going to be able to significantly disciple or build relationships with around 12, so right. At least that's kind of what I think, and so that's where I think it's just so important. Huge importance there.
Yeah, I love that. And even if you have a good set of volunteers that are well trained, that love students, they're going to be there for a long time. Even if God calls you somewhere else,
yes,
you've set up that ministry. It's still in good hands, assuming that the new guy doesn't come in and blow it all up. But
totally. Well, can you imagine a scenario where you leave and the ministry barely misses a beat?
Yeah.
Because you've just created, you've surrounded yourself with people that they just step in and continue to do what they already do because it's not based on you and you alone. So, yeah.
So that kind of leads to our next question. What are some of the pitfalls that you've seen, especially next gen leaders, fall into as, in just preventing them from finishing well in this space?
Yeah. I think the natural thing for anybody listening, we would automatically go to, the potential for moral failure, right? Because we all know folks, we all know stories of youth pastors and ministers, pastors, worship pastors across the board. So when I talk in the book that I wrote on longevity, I talk about the fact that you need to make sure you've got those guardrails up in your life, and you need to make sure that you're, committed to those. Yeah. Because I think again, you've just got to make sure you're protecting yourself with that. But I think another area that I think is worth talking about when it comes to experiencing longevity is, when you start out and you're 25 years old and you don't have kids and you're not making much money, and all of that is really exciting. But once you start having family and your wife, if you're a guy youth pastor, your wife's role changed. Now, I know not all youth pastors are male. I mean, we got females that are doing a great job at that as well. So I want to make sure I acknowledge that and not completely throw everybody in the same boat there. But I'm a guy, and I think about guys, and I think about guy youth pastors that have families. And when I think about that, man, one of the struggles I've seen youth pastors have over the years that have been a stumbling block for them is when all of a sudden those kids start coming, they don't make the adjustment very well to being a youth pastor that has kids in their family, and my wife will tell you how her role just completely changed. She wasn't the youth pastor's wife with no kids, like she was now. She had a toddler. I mean, first time we showed up to camp, dude, I remember, I'll never forget this moment. Hattiesburg, Mississippi. We're doing our own camp. We roll into camp with buses full of kids. I'm the camp director for the entire camp. Plus I'm in charge of my group. And as we get off, I look at my wife, and she's got her suitcase, my son Dylan's suitcase, who's like, a year old, a diaper bag, bedding for both of them, pack and play, all of those things. And I'm supposed to lead. Now at this point, I'm a dad and I'm a husband, and I'm like, well, how am I going to take care of her and get her to her cabin, which is awesome that she's even coming in the first place. But I also have to be the camp director and get my kids to their cabin. I mean, it was like a just crazy moment, that we had to completely adjust and learn how to do that. And I figured out how to take advantage of leaders in my group to help me with those moments, because they understood, because we wanted her to be around, for that. So, but learning how to adapt when family comes, I mean, just huge. I mean, you guys know what that's like. I mean, y'all have kids,
of course,
travel, and you got to make the best, of your time with your family.
Great.
And make sure that's healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that problem solving ability is a key skill that I think ministry leaders, we should even have training on that, helping leaders to zoom out and think about all the alternatives to solve the problem. Not that kids are a problem, but they do present some unique challenges and opportunities that we need to take advantage of. And there's so many, like I serve in the collegiate space. And so we've been able to actually get a lot of different help and find different ways to maximize that as an opportunity for Christy to invest in young women. And even kind of tag team. I'll be with the kids and she'll go meet with ladies and she'll do ministry, and then we'll kind of, so there's lots of different ways. It's just a matter of figuring it out and problem solving that. So
and I think Paul too, just being anticipating those things as well. Try to identify those seasons of your life that are going to be coming. Because just as much as the season was when I had toddlers, the impact that had, it was a completely different season when my kids started playing baseball. It was a completely different season whenever all of a sudden I had teenagers of my own in my youth ministry. That's like, that was crazy days. And so now we're in that season of kids going off to college, so it's all these things, but anticipating those and adjusting with the mindset that my goal is to serve in ministry as long as I possibly can. So I want to make sure I make those adjustments well. And like you said, Paul, I mean, solve those problems when they come about and not allow those to be defeated. And part of that also, man, is just anticipating the fact that, I write about this. I'll throw one more in just as a bonus real quick. You're going to have to live a life of simplicity when it comes to finances, because even if you're at a big church, you're still, when you're in your 30s, you're going to be making less than the average 30-year-old that has gone to school as much as you maybe have gone to school. So, we always joke, and I don't mean this as a judgment on what people drive. It's just a way to model it. Right. We're Kia people, not Honda people. I'm not anti-Honda people, just to be clear. They're actually really sweet. I wish I could have got one, but they have more bells and whistles. But we made an intentional decision to drive a Kia because we could save some money in that area and spend that money in other ways, like vacation or whatever. So it's making those kind of decisions. All those things I think play into longevity, because there is going to be that moment where you're like, man, we're struggling trying to figure out how to do all this. So.
Yeah. And one thought that came to mind, Chris, is even just you've been through all those different seasons. And I'm saying this kind of to our audience, our listeners, there are other leaders that have been through those seasons. You're not the first 25-year-old that has a newborn baby that's getting 3 hours of sleep, but still has to write that talk for tonight. You're not the first person that's been through that. Yeah, that's right. And so,
or write a seminary paper with your kid on your lap.
Yeah, exactly. Right? We've been there. And so there are leaders in your life. And if you don't have one, man, email us. We'll connect you with some people in your state, in your region, that can really encourage you and help you problem solve. The great thing about teachability is you don't have to learn all the lessons the hard way. Okay. That's the only, that's the only shortcut to success in life. And so
I love that. It's true.
I just think about, there's guys like Chris out there that have so much wisdom to offer, and let's tap into that.
I've never said, Paul, I've never said no to some guy that wants to hang out, can I take you to lunch? Heck yeah, let's do this, unless you're trying to sell me on your product. If that's a different story. I say no to those people now all the time. But for real, man, like most people will say yes. That Paul, I think you're right on. You're onto something. They're big, and that'd be a piece of advice. There would be to say, if you're sitting back right now thinking, man, I just wish I had friends that were also in youth ministry, instead of sitting back and waiting for somebody to reach out to you, you reach out to somebody.
Yeah. And
just see if you could take somebody to lunch or have coffee and just ask those questions. I'm still a product. I'm a product of mentoring as well. I've had great mentors, but I've chased after those people in my life and asked them to help. And I think that's huge, man.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So our next question here is, what advice would you give churches that are looking to hire a youth pastor or a college pastor?
Good luck.
Yeah.
Okay,
pray.
He's out. He's out.
Pray.
Man, it's hard. You guys know it's hard. Y'all getting the same phone calls. I can just tell everybody listening that's not in denominational work like we deal with here in Georgia, and even guys that work for NAM. I get 2 to 3 calls or emails a week easily. Of course.
Yep.
And the problem is the well seems to be dry. And lots of us have had conversations about that as to why. Maybe that has something to do with the pandemic and how many people we lost. It probably has more to do with the fact that in the last 10 years, somewhere along the line, we stopped calling out the call the way we should, or stopped mentoring, right?
Absolutely.
Shane, I know you're hard about that. I think there's a book coming out about that, as a matter of fact.
I've heard.
Plug. Because we recognize, so that's what we're doing in Georgia. Every camp or event we do, we give an opportunity. Plus, we've also created that opportunity for kids to respond and go through a mentoring process with us, discipleship process with us. But that said, that doesn't answer the question. How do you find that youth pastor? I think a lot of churches are having to figure out how to raise those people from within their own church. And also recognizing that maybe you don't have to have a full-time paid person to do that. You just find the right team of parents to do that with the right leader that can kind of function maybe almost bivocationally. So that's huge. I think you just, outside of that though, you've just got to work the phones hard and just continue to try to find the right people from the right places. Meaning you're going to have to look at seminaries, and they've recently talked to one of the presidents, and he was talking about when you narrow it down to how many people he actually has that's going to come out of seminary going into youth ministry, it's a few people each year. So you have to be willing to look at different colleges, and you have to be willing to look at different churches. I do think this though, I will say that the churches that are healthiest and are taking the best care. I don't mean necessarily paying the much, paying the most, although the money part does matter. Right. But the days of like just paying your staff peanuts and being able to get away with that, that's probably not going to work as much anymore, because the guys and girls that are good, they're going to find a gig, and they're going to find a good paying gig, and a healthy church as well. So I think all of those things, sort of play into that. But in all seriousness though, I mean, just pray. And I know that sounds like a minister type answer, but honestly, just praying for that right person to come in. And I haven't met with, I will say this too, Paul, I haven't met with a couple search committees as part of my new gig. And it's interesting how sometimes I sit down with search committees and there doesn't seem to be a clear vision for what they're actually looking for in the first place.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. Mm-hmm.
So a little bit of that, I think, is pandemic fault, but I think a lot of it is that part of their mindset at times is that we just want somebody to come in and take care of our students and keep them happy,
No doubt. Yeah.
Or reach a bunch of kids. And there's just got to be a bigger vision than that.
Yeah, I agree.
And that kind of comes full circle to the question we started out with. I mean, helping this Gen Z to find Jesus, it's the old model is just not going to work. We've got to do better. We've got to do better. I mean, good night, man. They need, because there's so many other options out there for our teenagers right now that are good and fun and exciting and honestly fulfilling in some ways.
Yeah.
But it's not Jesus though, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, a little fired up. Listen.
Yeah, no, that's a good word, Chris. That's a good word. And I mean, we're the same, man. We get, like you said, 3 to 5 calls a week. And typically, you know, they all go, you know, hey, Shane, I'm looking for a stud, a rock star. You know, it's one of those, right? Hey, I need a stud. I need a rock star, you know, and it's like, hey, we're, you know, like, hey, preferred MDiv, you know, can preach, organize, lead a team, like be on the campus, make a revival happen.
With a beautiful spouse and 3 kids.
Yeah, that's right. They look good on our brochure, you know, and hey, we're going to pay them $30,000 a year. You know what I mean? It's like, it sounds like, well, first of all, if I find that person, I'm not telling you about them. I'm going to hire them. You know what I mean? So I think what we really got to do is kind of peel back and go, hey, we want God called men and women that meet the qualifications of a leader according to the word of God, you know? And I think another thing too is like, even when our next gen leaders are in place, our youth pastors, our college pastors, is putting some of the pressure on us as leaders to go, who are you raising up that can replace you one day? Because typically what we do is we wait till there's a void. And then as a church, now we got to go hire somebody. And we typically hire somebody from another church. And then now that church is looking. And then they hire somebody from another church. And now that church is looking. And so we're kind of shuffling the shepherds around instead of raising up more shepherds. You know?
Come on.
So,
yeah. He's preaching now.
Oh, yeah. No, I think there's, you know, when you write a book, there's a lot of just kind of stays, you know, starts just kind of coming out of your pores. Well, Chris, man, this has been amazing. Hey, we always close our Next Gen on Mission podcast with really the same on mission charge. The heart behind this podcast is to see the next generation realize they're really the now generation. They're not the future of the church, but the church right now, that they have a mission now, a calling on their life now. So Chris, would you give us one closing thought on this and one quick practical next step?
I would say, you know, one of my favorite series that we did when I was doing middle school ministry at Johnson Ferry was a series we did called Young. As we looked at what I wanted to say to our middle school students was, when you look at scripture, the Bible is full of stories that God used incredibly young people to literally change the world.
That's right.
When you look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were teenagers, you know, most likely teenagers, you know, Daniel, the age of Daniel, David, when he was chosen to be king, Mary, the mother of Jesus, most likely an older teenager, probably at best. I mean, you look at all of these people, but we don't ever spend a lot of time teaching that way. And the church doesn't always necessarily approach teenagers with the same heart. I feel like that God approaches teenagers, which is he wants to use them to do really, really big things as well. So, man, when I think about that question, I first of all, that's my heartbeat as well. They need to be a part of the church right now. And I think as far as like a practical step goes, I would say go deeper with our students.
Yeah.
The things they're learning in high school and even in middle school, the depth of like knowledge they have to do math, the kind of math they do and science they do.
Yeah.
But yet we don't think they can handle theology. Come on. Like, you know, I know it's a little I sound a little snarky right now, but of course they can. Of course they can. They can handle that. And maybe, just maybe, we need to work. Well, I'm getting a little preachy again. But maybe we need to work better or work harder, I should say, at teaching them those type of things than we do on what's the funniest game we can come up with. What's the next gimmick I can do to get a bunch of kids to come. Those things matter still. I'm not saying they don't matter at all. But man, if I'm spending more time working on my game idea than I am my
sermon prep,
maybe, just maybe.
No doubt.
maybe just probably, we're probably not getting that right, you know? And so man.
I love that phrase. I love that phrase that Shane uses is, let's not dumb it down. Let's train them up. Let's train the students up to where they need to be. So Chris, thank you so much. And I know there's lots more wisdom that you have available. So what are some ways that people can connect with you? And what was the name of the book that you wrote?
So here's what's interesting about the book. It's called Consider This, A Youth Minister's Guide to Longevity. It's with YM360.
Great.
They've got like 12 copies left right now. And we're in the process of redoing the book, and it's going to come out kind of in the later part of 2022. So it will be re-released with a new title. It's probably going to be called something to the effect of just longevity. There will be some additional thoughts, revisions, especially some thoughts related to pandemic and how to survive that as a youth pastor. So that's one big way. And then you can find me on Georgia Baptist Mission Board's website as well. We've got some resources there that I'm working on, some other podcast type things that we're going to be, and anybody's welcome to use those. But I'm just Chris Trent on Instagram, though. That's probably the best way to kind of find me, or I'm on Facebook as well, because I'm over 50 at this point. So I'm definitely still. One thing I'm worried to death about. It hasn't happened yet. You guys prayed that, but I'm worried about the first time I get spoofed on Facebook. You know, where somebody like steals your picture and it makes it an account of you. Like, it hasn't happened yet, but I feel like it happens in your 50s. So hoping it doesn't happen anytime soon.
That's awesome, Chris. Well, Chris, man, thank you so much for joining us. Just a wealth of just wisdom and knowledge that you've shared with us. And we could talk about this stuff for the rest of the day, but man, thank you so much for your time. And friends, thank you once again for just being a part of the Next Gen on Mission conversation, spending your time with us. We pray that this has been a help to you and an encouragement to you. And thank you again for just taking the time to share about the Next Gen on Mission podcast. So if you have any questions on reaching the next generation, please email us at evangelism@nam.net, and we'll try to address those on a future podcast. And then continue to just be a champion for this podcast. If you will, continue to share it. Hey, if you share on social media or anything like that, be sure to tag Paul and I or GenSend's social media, and we'll be sure to reshare your shares, because sharing is caring. Also, if you want to watch these conversations, you can now watch the video versions at our YouTube channel. That's GenSend on YouTube, just GenSend. And we'd love for you to be able to watch those videos and share those as well. All right. Hey, we pray you have a great rest of your day, and tell somebody about Jesus.